I'm going to be your moderator today. And for those of you that are new to Keystone, we are a career management consulting firm, and we specialize in career transition, outplacement, and we also provide career development services, including executive coaching, management training, and leadership development programs. And our HR Forum is designed to bring HR professionals together to talk about trends that are happening in the industry and in the world that pertains to today, and really provide you with practical knowledge and application so that you can face the challenges that you face each and every day. And we are really excited about today's topic. Speaking of trends, the topic today is Ask the Experts. Everything you wanted to know about layoffs and furloughs. And we, understandably, being in the COVID-19 environment that we're in, this is a very popular topic. We received a lot of questions, and we're going to get to so many of those today, and we're going to be asking our experts that we have here today. Some of the questions that came through, I want to mention, pertain to areas that are a little bit out of our expertise, things like PPP, the CARES Act. And so what we're going to do is we're actually going to send some follow-on information. We're collecting resources from experts in those areas, and I'm going to get those to you in an email. So stay tuned for that in the next couple days, and we'll be gathering information on that. Some of the other questions that we received definitely had more of a legal bend. And so we are excited to say that we have a special guest to join us as well, Jeff Rudd from Jackson Lewis. Welcome, Jeff. Jeff is a principal in the Chicago office of Jackson Lewis, and his practice focuses on employment litigation. So we definitely have the right man here to answer questions that have, again, a legal bend to them. One more housekeeping aspect I want to mention before I introduce my colleagues is if you do have a question that you want to have answered live, there is at the bottom of your screen a button that you can hit Q&A, and just type your question in there. There's also an option to stay anonymous if you'd like, so you can do that as well. We'll do our best. As you can imagine, we've gotten a lot of questions on this topic, and we're going to be covering a lot, but we'll do our best to get those answered for you. So without further ado, I want to introduce my amazing colleagues, Elaine Varelas, who is our managing partner out of the Keystone Boston office, and John Myers, who is president of Keystone in Chicago. So if you could introduce yourselves and give a background to our audience, that would be great. Elaine, I'll start with you.
Thanks, Brenda. I appreciate that. I'm Elaine Varelas. As Brenda said, I'm the managing partner of Keystone Partners. I've been here a little over 30 years, so I feel like I've got quite a bit of experience in the world of outplacement, working with companies who have had to go through reductions for lots of different reasons over so many different challenges. This is certainly a different one, and I'm very interested in having this conversation with HR people to really support them as they support their employees. So I look forward to the webinar. Thanks.
Thank you. John?
Great, and I am John Myers, and I'm the president of Chicago, as Brenda mentioned. Formerly, I was the one of the founding partners of Kensington International, and we joined forces with Keystone in May of last year, and we're moving forward as a larger organization with even more capabilities. I also have been in this business for 30 years and generally in the career transition, executive assessment, coaching, and development areas of the business. And I'm excited to be here to talk to everybody too. These really are, and you hear it a lot, I think unprecedented at times. And it's not quite as straightforward how you navigate everything as it used to be. And we look forward to sharing what we know, what we've learned, and hopefully that'll be helpful to you.
Great, thank you. Well, let's just jump in. As I said, we've got a lot to cover. And actually, John, I'm going to start with you, if you don't mind. I have some questions that I think you could provide some really good insight about. So there were a lot of questions that came through about furloughs. You know, furloughs are different from the standard reduction in force or layoffs. And I'm just wondering if you could give our audience an overview of furloughs. What are some best practices when it comes to furloughs? And also, what is the difference between a furlough and a standard layoff? Can you just provide some insight on that?
Sure, I appreciate that. So, you know, an employee furlough is a mandatory suspension from work without pay. It can be as brief or as long as the employer wants during the coronavirus pandemic. The one thing to guard or look for is insurance plans can limit their benefits to 1 year, so it's probably best to check on that. Not that a furloughed situation for a year would be a good situation. Furloughed employees are absolutely banned from doing any work and on behalf of their employer whatsoever. It's kind of a zero tolerance rule. A furloughed employee can't so much as make a phone call or even answer emails. Even a 5-minute, you know, kind of a break to do work is going to affect the no work rule. If a salaried employee does any work on furlough, the employer typically has to pay them. So you want to guard against that. As a result, though, furloughed employees typically their access to their work accounts and their devices are revoked just to make sure that they're not indeed doing work, which might be the tendency maybe for some of the better people that you find yourself having to furlough. You know, in terms of best practices, you know, historically furloughs have not been very common. And if you go back to the Great Recession, you know, there was only about 0.5% of companies that took that route. 20% did layoffs at that same time. So furloughs have not historically been real common. They're best used as a worker retention strategy when a company is facing what they believe to be a temporary financial difficulty. Layoffs are a better solution if changes look to be more permanent. Our advice is that it's best to provide as much advance notice as possible. As you'll hear a lot from me, early and frequent communications from a single source, typically a top-level executive, if not the top executive, is key. Some of the things that people want to hear is, what in total is the company doing and what have they done to try to avoid furloughs and layoffs? Shouldn't typically be your first course of action. Why do you think a furlough is the best decision given the circumstances? How employees have been or will be selected for the furlough is an important question to ask and answer for people. What the furlough process is going to look like and what support they will be provided in the furlough, and how furloughed employees can stay connected to the company and stay informed. So small department meetings following a general communication can be a good strategy for questions and answers. When those are important, Zoom or phone calls work great. Zoom probably works a little bit better if your employees have access to that technology. And one thing to make certain of is that you collect the best contact information for people, because to the extent that you want to find a way to stay connected with them, to provide them with information, and to the extent that you may have taken them off of email or off of some of the company-sponsored communication vehicles, you'll want to know how to get in touch with them. So that's kind of an overview of furloughs and best practices. If you look at the difference between a layoff and a furlough, layoffs are best used when it's anticipated that the employee or the group of employees will no longer be required in the future. Believe it or not, there's a lot of benefits to the employee of a layoff versus a furlough. I mean, there's great clarity that they will be leaving the organization. They will not be returning. It's clear that they need to make career choices. They need to do a job search. They're obviously eligible for unemployment compensation in most situations. They get paid their accrued vacation, and other payouts associated with a separation. There's often severance pay involved in a layoff. It's clear that health insurance is now their responsibility and COBRA is available. And often job search support is provided in the form of outplacement. So layoffs, there can be a good deal of benefits for going that route. You know, the drawbacks, salary and compensation stops, they're out of a job, in a job search, nobody's favorite activity. And there's a great uncertainty as to what new opportunities will present themselves, especially in this environment. Mm-hmm. The benefits of a layoff for the employer is that there's clarity that the employees will not be returning to the company. And there's clarity and finality for the employees that remain.
I think, John, do you think, John, that part of the reason furloughs were re-engaged in since so many years have gone by since the time furloughs were used, is that most employers anticipated this would be short-lived? I think when COVID, certainly Brenda, you can address this, when COVID-19 started, everyone anticipated, we'd be out for 2 weeks, they'd clean the offices and we would come back. And so I think so many employers looked at furloughs as the answer at that point, anticipating people would be back. And they're a good choice for a quick temporary separation.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. I mean, I think that's the best time to use a furlough is when you are anticipating a business recovering over some reasonable period of time, and you want to keep employees connected to the company because you want to be able to bring them back. You want to take advantage of the experience that they have, and so forth. So I think that's the big difference, because in past situations, it felt more permanent. This one's just hard to predict.
Yeah, and it definitely, I think you said it well in terms of there being, some more uncertainty, right? If somebody's been furloughed, and then, like you said, people don't typically look at a layoff as a benefit, but you did say there is clarity in that and there is finality. So I think those are some really good points. So thank you, John. On the same topic of furloughs, Jeff, this question is for you from a legal perspective. We received a really good question just around, fairness always being a concern. And this question came in when someone had registered. In furloughing employees, what can be done to ensure that minority or marginalized communities are not unduly impacted? Can you give us some insight on that, Jeff?
Yeah, no, and that's a very good question. I mean, first and foremost, whenever you're making a furlough decision, it's not any different than making a layoff decision or even a reduction in force decision. It's an adverse impact on the employees. They're not going to be paid for a period of time. They're not going to be working. So you want to make sure that those who are selected for furlough are selected for legitimate business reasons. I think during the initial phases of the COVID pandemic, what we've typically seen are furloughs based upon departments or job functions that aren't needed in the short term. And this has typically led to situations where there's less of a risk of people in protected classes being selected for furlough in a discriminatory fashion because it's entire departments, divisions they're being shut down for a short period of time. But I think even in those circumstances, employers should strongly consider having a disparate impact analysis done on their furlough selections to make sure that statistically certain classes aren't being disproportionately selected for the furlough. A lot of law firms, including mine, and consultants can often do this analysis for a very reasonable fee because it's generally not attorneys doing it, it's statisticians. I would say, however, that as we go forward in all of this, I think the need to conduct this kind of disparate impact analysis may become greater as companies are kind of transitioning from furloughs to maybe more longer term layoffs and reductions in force. And when that happens, you typically are seeing individual employees being selected for reduction instead of entire departments or job functions. And there, the risks are a lot greater that you need to make certain that the criteria that you're using for selecting people isn't discriminatory.
Yeah, that's very, very helpful. Thank you. And I just want to pose this question. This came in live. Let me just find it here. Can you collect unemployment and have COBRA on furlough? Does anybody want to chime in on that? Do we know?
Yeah, on furlough, typically employees on furlough in every state that I'm aware of are eligible to receive unemployment benefits and presently enhanced unemployment benefits. And typically, although I'm not a benefits counsel, I've been through enough of this over the last few months that typically you need to coordinate with your benefits advisors or counsel as to whether a furlough triggers a COBRA qualifying event. Typically, if employees aren't working, then they're losing their coverage, and that is a COBRA qualifying event. Although I will say a lot of insurance carriers have kind of changed their coverage guidelines during all of this to allow more continuation of benefits without going through COBRA, but that's an insurance company by insurance company issue.
Yeah, I think many companies are trying to continue to provide health benefits while employees are furloughed. And during that time, they are allowed to collect unemployment, which again is a state-by-state decision. One of the challenges that HR people are having is with the enhanced, as Jeff said, with the enhanced unemployment, some people are making more money on unemployment than they were on their jobs. Yep. And so I think HR people and organizations are really challenged to focus on how they're going to bring their employees back, how the change in financial compensation, again, though it's short term, we don't know how short term, is something that HR people are going to be challenged by.
I agree. Speaking of HR challenges, Elaine, actually, this is a good segue into this next question, because there's, obviously being in this world for quite some time now, having expertise in helping organizations with reduction in force plannings, whether it's COVID related or not, there are situations where the furlough inevitably becomes a layoff. And from a communication perspective, can you provide some insight on how to insert incredible amounts of compassion in that message, but also the message that happens to the individuals who are being impacted and also to the remaining employees? How does an organization communicate that sort of thing when it was originally going to be a furlough?
And the point is really, really well taken. And I think both John and Jeff addressed pieces of that. The level of communication that's going on right now between organizations and employees, current employees, furloughed employees, employees who are trying to work effectively from home. They say that to run that kind of organization effectively, managers have tripled their communications. And I think that that's the first part that's needed. And it can't just be your frontline manager. It really has to come from the top. So you've seen letters from presidents of organizations, letters from human resources, everyone reaching out to articulate what the current thinking for the organization is. And again, organizations started using furloughs because they really anticipated that they would be able to bring those employees back. It's what they wanted to do. They're a skilled group. They hope that they could furlough them for a short period of time, keep them on the payroll, continue to pay their benefits, and then bring them back without skipping a beat, so to speak, and they would collect unemployment. What's happened now is this has gone on for far longer than any of us anticipated, and organizations are feeling the financial impact of trying to make very significant different decisions. And so looking at the employee population, looking at the positions that have to be eliminated. And again, we've always talked about positions, not people. People are impacted, positions are eliminated, and it's what's the case for the business. And these are the hardest times for HR people who, again, are working with their managers to say, select the positions. How are you going to continue to run your business without certain kinds of positions that aren't needed right now or can't be afforded right now? So organizations are redesigning themselves, looking at those positions, and they're also taking a look at, when we do this, back to Jeff, bring in external, internal counsel. What's the disparate impact that's happening with the people who are affected? And then the other part, I loved the CEO of Airbnb, who talked about the fact that everyone impacted was spoken to individually. It's hugely time consuming. It is it's a logistical headache, but you hired people individually, and they do want the opportunity to be notified one at a time from an HR manager, their direct manager, a letter from the CEO in terms of the impact that this has had on them. And so organizations doing layoffs really need to take a very comprehensive look at what their process is going to involve and how they're going to make that happen. So this is just but one challenge that people have in their lives full of challenges.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very.
Just to follow up on that a little bit, open, honest, and transparent communications goes such a long way with people, because we are in a real unpredictable environment, and being honest around that, I think, is important. You may start off with a furlough, and that your best intention is that we're going to bring people back, and then things may change. I was facilitating a senior executive session yesterday where the subject was, what is going to be the permanent changes associated with this pandemic, not the ones that are going to come back and bounce back. And we spent hours kind of thinking that through as a group, but ultimately we didn't reach a conclusion. We just don't exactly know. I think we're going to find ourselves needing to react to this situation as it evolves. And I think being open about that with people and engaged, as Elaine said, in regular conversations is the key.
John, you just gave me a perfect segue into my next question, and I'm actually going to direct it to you, because I think it can build off what you were just saying, is this piece around morale, right? So HR professionals, they're responsible for obviously employee well-being and culture. How do you, what's the impact of morale once employees return from a furlough? And how do you, mitigate the negative impact that it has? Any ideas there? And then I have a couple follow-ons to that as well. So just.
Yeah, so, morale is obviously a big subject. There's so many things impacting the way we all feel right now, of which employment's an important part of it, but there's so many other elements to it. I think the key is great communications, and I think the key is doing it right from the very start. From the first time you communicate that there's, the business is having some troubles, and people probably understand that, to what you're considering doing, to making sure that you look at other cost reductions before you start looking at people. And then when you do start looking at people, being honest around furloughs or layoffs or what have you. But then once those decisions are made, it's about how you communicate that to people. And then if you're furloughing, how do you stay in touch with people? How do you continue to make them feel like they're a part of the community and the fabric of the company, even though they're really not allowed to do work? I think the way you manage the furlough, the way you manage the communications with those who are furloughed and those that remain in the company will have a lot to do with what the morale looks like, in the company now and when the people return. That would be my best advice.
Yeah. So you feel like it definitely, obviously when it's happening, but when they return from a morale perspective, everything that you did at the beginning is going to have a big impact for when they return.
Yeah. And then when they come back, have a pizza party, or a virtual pizza party, or celebrate the return, and, be excited to have them back. And, people are going to be ready to get back, I think. And I think if they just feel like we want them back, and now they're back, and, we welcome them into the fold, I think they'll hit the ground running.
I think one of the areas that we missed a little bit is people whose hours have been reduced. So they've been cut back. And I think that's another area that companies have needed to talk to in terms of being able to collect unemployment for hours that have been reduced. And people who have had to reschedule what their work looks like without having it impact the service that they provide or whoever their customer is. So that's been another challenge that I know HR people have had to take a look at, is making that determination is in what's the extent of work that we have for people, and can we take a look at that? I really liked part of what Jeff said, and again, back to treating furloughs with the same seriousness that you treat reductions in force, and the same level of planning that you would put into having a reduction in force needs to be put into play when you're planning a furlough. So I think that same logistics planning, the same messaging, scripting, who's involved, supporting the person after they're impacted, whether by furlough or by a reduction, becomes really important as well.
Elaine just read the mind of an attendee, because they just asked that question: should furloughs be treated like a reduction in force or a layoff by way of confidentiality and protecting privacy of those impacted? Sounds like, yeah, the answer to that is yes.
I think they should be. There's a lot of sensitive information, and there are so many changes that happen in terms of people who are on a furlough list or on a reduction list. I think the challenge with furloughs is often, as is with layoffs, that work needs to be done around those individuals. But how that information is treated within the organization becomes really important. And so communicating with others who need to find ways to work with people who were in that place needs to be treated very respectfully. But I do think all of the legal implications, the communication implications, and the support become really important. Work is more than just a place to go. Work provides so many other methods of support for employees, whether it's the employee assistance program, which typically does stay available during furloughs, and again, typically does stay available when people have been laid off. People in organizations who are providing outplacement after a reduction. Again, we're biased, but certainly we know the level of support that we provide when people are really frightened about what their financial future looks like.
Thank you. That's really, really good. So now I have a little bit of a different angle, and I believe this is going to be a Jeff question, but again, John, Elaine, please chime in. But definitely this is directed to Jeff. What are the legal risks associated with furloughing employees unable to work from home?
Yeah, there's actually a multitude of legal issues, some of which have been touched on already. John brought up pay issues. When people are on furlough, they absolutely cannot be working, which raises some issues in terms of communicating with your employees, because you don't want them to have access to their email while they're on furlough, because you could have the good employee trying to do work, and they're going to have to be compensated for the work if they do it. The benefit continuation issues we touched on. But I think first and foremost, employers need to take into account the Federal WARN Act and state mini WARN Acts. Those laws can vary a lot by state, but typically they require 60 days or more advance notice of either a termination or a layoff. And a lot of the furloughs that were done, people thought they would be short term, but they could extend beyond 6 months and could then trigger WARN. And it's very difficult to go back in time to give a WARN notice when the furlough turns into a longer layoff and a WARN qualifying event. And I'd also note that in California, a layoff of any length, a furlough of any length, can be covered by the California WARN Act. So taking WARN considerations into account at the start of furloughs is hugely important. Immigration issues are very important. Employees who are on temporary work visas, they may be required to be actively working to satisfy their visa. So that's something that needs to be taken into account with furloughs. How to handle PTO time is a complicated issue that varies a lot by state. Some states you have to pay out all of their accrued PTO at the start of a furlough. Other states, permit employers to allow employees to kind of burn the PTO, while they're on furlough. Some allow the employees to have a choice as to whether to use it or not, but it varies a lot by state, and it's been one of the more complicated issues that I've seen as each furlough has come up.
I'm glad you brought up the state issue, Jeff, because I know we've got people from Massachusetts, the New England states. We've got a number of people who are here from Raleigh, a number from Raleigh. Sorry, I know that's not a state. From North Carolina, from Illinois. Are any of these state regulations being overridden by the feds at this point, so that HR people have to watch out for even more new regulations?
Well, thankfully, there's been a very little action on the federal level outside of the CARES Act and the FFCRA that was passed early on. What changes we are typically seeing are being driven more by the state legislatures. Some state legislatures are stepping in to kind of make some changes to their employment laws as this progresses. And unfortunately, what I think that means for HR personnel and the like is that we're just going to have to stay on top of the constantly changing legal landscape. I would love some federal one-size-fits-all to make life simpler, but I just don't think that's going to happen.
I think the HR people would be looking forward to that as well.
Yes.
Definitely. So I want to come to this whole piece around virtual communications. Obviously, we're all here. Typically, we have these in person at a live event, but we're all pivoting and making do with what we have, which we're grateful for the technology. But Elaine, I'm wondering if you could chime in around the whole piece around virtual. I mean, these are very sensitive conversations that are being had, not just from a reduction in force standpoint, but also there's a lot of different activities being done, such as interviewing and ultimately onboarding people. So what are you seeing companies doing when it comes to are companies hiring? If they are, how are they conducting those practices, and are they onboarding people virtually right now? What are you seeing?
The good news, you've got a lot of questions in there, Brenda, but the good news is companies are hiring. And people really need to be prepared for that. And I think HR people know that on one side of their organization, they're hiring for roles that they need to fill, while on the other side, they may actually be laying people off or furloughing people. So a huge part of what we're doing is making sure our job seekers understand what it will take to take a look at finding a new job. What we don't want in this economy is people to give up that activity. We know that they can get jobs. We know the kind of work that it takes. So we've been working with people to find new jobs, recognizing how different it is to network virtually. But it's a must. You cannot just apply online for jobs. The networking part still takes a huge activity and a huge investment. Companies, I would say, are being much more flexible in their interview process, but it's very hard for people who can't get on any kind of video conference. And people really want to connect face-to-face. Hiring managers want to connect face-to-face with who this person is. And hopefully not in any kind of discriminatory matter, but it helps people develop that bond. So, people need to be more prepared to communicate about themselves, about their background, about the fact that they can work virtually, that they're equipped to work virtually, that they're self-managed. And those are really important things to be able to talk about. You also need to do a video interview. I realize that I've got sunlight streaming across my face and I don't know which way to turn right now. So if I were a candidate, I would have realized this earlier. All of those things are things that we would be working with people to help them develop better skills on. HR people are being challenged with, as you said, onboarding. How do you develop a very significant onboarding plan when people don't get to shadow someone that they'll be working with or walking up and down corridors? So it's going to impact us now. It's going to impact us in the future. And I think training and development people are going to have, they're going to be in high demand in terms of helping make that happen.
And speaking of the area of topic that we're talking about today, notifications. happening online. What are you seeing as far as that? I think you've seen some horror stories, and I think you've seen some success stories. So can you share on that?
We've seen some interesting approaches, and many companies have said, I want the person to Zoom. I want to see their face when I'm telling them that, you know, they've lost their job. And I think there are things that you can mandate, and that's not one of them. So if an employee wants to see you face to face, to hear the message that they either anticipate that they're going to get or are afraid that they're going to get, this is not, I don't see this as a mandated communication. I think you can say to the employee, I would have liked to have been able to tell you this in person. I would have liked to have been able to tell you this face to face. This is difficult business news. Your position's been eliminated as a result of this change in business based on COVID-19. We valued the work that you did for the organization. We're going to be able to provide you with these benefits moving forward. Healthcare continuation, severance, job search assistance, and we'd like to support you in that job search any way we can. Once again, I want to thank you for your contributions. If a person's comfortable hearing that face-to-face via Zoom, that's great. If they're not, they need the opportunity to be in a private location. Not everyone has that. There are many people with lots of kids around, lots of people around, and not necessarily private access to a computer when everyone wants. And I think that's something we really need to focus on and to think twice about. Mm-hmm. So your goal as the HR person is to help your managers understand that and help your leaders understand that there are some things that you can ask for. Brenda, I'd really like to have a face-to-face meeting with you right now. Would that be okay? If Brenda says no, then you need to accept that.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Thank you. So I just want to check the chat here real quick, and whoever wants to answer this question around what are your recommendations for returning either furloughed and or laid off employees regarding the background screening aspect of returning to work? Who wants to take that? And then I have another follow-up after that one as well.
I'll go ahead and take it. I mean, typically companies are treating furloughed employees as still being employed. There's some legal ambiguities over this, but what employers are trying to do is send a message that you're still our employee. We don't have work for you right now, but you're still part of our team. And to that end, I think doing background checks when you're bringing employees back from furlough is kind of inconsistent with that messaging. And then there are a host of issues that would need to be worked through if you were to do the background checks to ensure that you're fully compliant with the FCRA. Got
it. Okay. And this, Jeff, might be another one for you. I saw, does the WARN Act apply to employers with less than 100 employees?
The federal WARN Act does not, but some of the state, many WARN Acts have lower thresholds. For instance, Illinois is 75. And you also have to be cautious. I mean, in today's day and age, a lot of companies are very layered. You have subsidiaries, affiliates, the like, and sometimes those can be aggregated together to meet the 100 employee threshold. So you have to be careful with that. But under the federal WARN Act, generally 100 employees or less, you're not covered.
Got it. Okay, great. Thank you. Let me just see. Okay, so we might get to some, and I just want to mention too that we will do our best to get to everybody's questions. Ones that just aren't on the area of expertise today or on the topic, we will be sending out a follow-on email with information that we collect from different experts. We've seen some questions around unemployment and so forth. So we'll be doing our best to get you some resources to assist you there. So, so here I want to just talk a little bit more around if a company is having to plan a reduction in force. And John, I'm going to direct this one to you. What are some best practices? And again, Elaine, Jeff, chime in, please. What are some best practices around the timing between announcing a layoff and meeting with retained employees after the notifications are complete? What would you say is a good best practice there?
Yeah, my recommendation on that is I would get together with them as quickly as is possible, because the first phone calls that those people are going to be making are going to be to their colleagues, and you wouldn't want those colleagues to get a surprise phone call. There's even times where giving key people a heads up in advance can make sense if you don't feel like you can circle back to them quickly enough. I think the key is you want to be thinking about the person, you want to be thinking about their emotional well-being, you want to be thinking about what their actions may be after that conversation, and you want to get rid of the awkwardness that could be there by communicating with employees pretty quickly what's happened, and then maybe even giving them a little counsel on how they can be helpful to that person, should they interface with them.
Mm-hmm. Elaine, anything you want to add to that?
I absolutely agree with what John is saying. I think anytime there's an action that's taken, what people want to know is, am I next? So let me know that the action is over and I'm not impacted. And now let me know how you've treated my former colleague. Have you treated them fairly? Because that's how you'll be treating me if I'm in this same situation. So again, what kind of support did you provide for them? And it's always back to benefits, financial support, healthcare, EAP, and can you help me find a new job? Can you give me career transition assistance? And again, everyone needs to know that jobs are out there, jobs are happening. Many of you HR people, I'm sure, are working hard to fill some of the positions that you need to fill.
Great. Here's another, I think this is a really good question. Should we announce layoffs prior to doing them, to give employees a heads up? Is it a good idea to let staff know in advance that layoffs are coming?
I've always wondered when people ask that question, what they think the benefit is. Because when you announce a layoff in advance, everybody wonders if it's them. So even the people who aren't impacted are in a high adrenaline phase of worry. So now the entire organization is on red alert. They're nervous. The entire focus is on conversations about, will I be the person impacted? Who's going to be impacted? When will the layoff be? What will the benefits be? I think many employees right now are prepared and wondering about layoffs. So I don't necessarily think announcing a layoff is coming is beneficial for most people in organizations. I think that the questions that they need answered need to have answers before you let people know that they're being laid off. And again, everyone's going to want to know, what are my benefits? Will I be financially taken care of? And an entire organization on red alert is not an easy place to be.
Yeah, I'll even take that one step further. When you give a message like that to a broad swath of your employees, the ones that will receive the message hardest might be the people that aren't even going to be involved. So you end up panicking some of your best people, and you don't want to do that. You don't want to send more fear in the organization than you have to. You want to keep it as narrow as possible.
Mm-hmm. And this isn't here on the questions, but I just think it's important to mention, what do you both see the CEO's role in this being? How does the CEO communicate? How can they be involved in this? Obviously, should they be involved in this? What are your both takes on that?
I think there's two really important things. The CEO should be high visibility, and the CEO should listen to the CHRO. So it worries me when a CEO who may not have had any experience with a reduction gets involved and makes a decision without talking to the CHRO about the kind of impact or the worries that what this person's pronouncement might be. And without the experience that so many HR people, so many HR leaders have had. I think the CEO needs to, again, articulate that we've looked at every other alternative before impacting people. These are valuable people. We want to do everything we can to support them. They're skilled, helping them find new opportunities. But that it's the old, CHRO seat at the table issue, and that should be so long gone, especially now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I will tell you that, the CEO needs to be front and center in the spotlight. but they need to be really well coached, and the CHRO is the right person to do that. We've done quite a bit of that work when we can be helpful, because if the CEO says the wrong things, it can be more harmful than helpful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, very good. So I'm just looking at some of the questions that have come through here on the chat. So I'm going to ask this one. It may be all three of you will have something to contribute here. Are companies handling salespeople who work on commission while they are on a furlough? These salespeople have been developing their customers over months, and now that they are furloughed, the customers may still be using the products. A sales call that happened in February may have resulted in usage of the product in April while the employee was on furlough. And this is a medical device industry.
Jeff, is this illegal? When do you pay?
Yeah, it very much is. I mean, it all comes down to when a commission is deemed earned. And frankly, most of the time, that's going to depend upon what the commission plan says. In most states, the commission plan kind of governs when the commission's deemed earned. And so in that kind of situation, you really want to go back to the plan documents to determine, when the commission is earned under the plan. And if it's earned, you're going to have to pay it. And if it's not, then likely you don't. But this is also an area that does implicate some individual state laws that always need to be taken into account.
Perfect. Thank you. So I know we're jumping around a bit, but I just want to make sure we get to some of these live questions too. So going back to the communications piece regarding a reduction, as far as, giving people a quote unquote heads up, what about announcing just before the one-on-one meetings or the morning of the layoff? Thoughts there?
Typically what happens is once the first meeting happens,
Domino.
it spreads around the rest of the organization at that point. So there's not really a need for an announcement. The organization will take care of that for you. Again, it's specifically important that the HR people keep this information confidential, that they're very careful with the information until the end of the day. Particularly now, as we said, people will be calling one another very quickly to ask if they're impacted or not being impacted. So I'm not necessarily convinced. I'd love to talk to HR people more about that, about the whole concept of an announcement.
Okay, great. So can we talk about hiring right now? We covered this a little bit, but are there job prospects over the next few months? Elaine, you said that, I know we've been doing our own research and have been asking HR people if they're hiring, what industries and so forth. So it sounds like that is the case that we're seeing. But what industries do you see hiring right now, and what positions, any type of hot jobs that you're seeing?
The industries we've seen hiring in would be biotech, research opportunities from there. I think certainly the gig economy in terms of transportation, drivers, delivery people, people who more hourly people who have had those opportunities, that those are the ones that people see. But there are professional opportunities as well that organizations are listing. So there are industries, certainly the financial services industry got very busy with the PPPs and the administration and management of those. We've seen people in logistics, as I said, more jobs in those areas than we've seen elsewhere.
It's surprising that there are opportunities that are out there, and even in the executive search industry, of which Kensington used to be attached there. Depending on the industry segment, some search firms are doing quite well. If you're in healthcare, non-provider is an area that can have some good demand. So there's hope that there are jobs out there. It's not a completely stale economy right now.
Right, I agree. I'm seeing that as well from the conversations I'm having, and talking with clients. They are hiring, so there is definitely hope, that's for sure. So going back to the live questions that are coming through, here's one. And again, anyone chime in, please. We are updating our time clock so that employees can use their phones to clock in. They will also have the ability to continue to finger punch in. Should we be concerned about asking employees to use their personal phones? Is that a legal question?
Yeah, no, it's a very good question, and,
Yeah.
and I'm super sensitive to it in Illinois because we have the Biometric Privacy Act here, and I have more lawsuits over punch-in clocks than I care to even acknowledge. But yeah, I mean, one issue that's going to come up is as you require employees to use their phones as part of their job, you open yourself up to an argument that having a phone is a prerequisite to the job, and there could be obligations in terms of expense reimbursements for those states that have expense reimbursement laws, such as California and Illinois in particular, to keep track of. And also, you know, if the employees are using their phones to do this, you want to make sure that you have the appropriate applications in place so that the time data is secure and is your property. So you want to make sure that those things are taken care of too.
I think it's the information Jeff just provided as two very distinct pieces, the use of the phone, but the whole concept, as he said, of biometric data and its use has been something that's very big in Illinois and California. And I do think as we come into the whole non-touch medical information piece, we're going to see more of that. So this is going to be a very interesting time with taking temperatures, and is that saved data, and does that go anywhere, and the HIPAA laws and how those impact people knowing about having COVID or not. So I think I know California and Illinois have been much more advanced in biometric data, and it's something that we'll be talking more about in our work in Massachusetts and in North Carolina as well.
Well, and then I think there's also the side of of how people just feel. I mean, people have such different responses to these kinds of things. And, I think, trying to find a way to honor the way they feel about it and what makes them nervous is something we're all going to have to deal with.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think we talked about this, but I just want to make sure we cover it for everybody's purposes, because it did come through on the chat, and I believe we had it as part of the registration questions as well. So if this is a repeat, I apologize. But I think it's a really important question. So what if you start with a furlough and realize you need to move to a layoff? What process and considerations should be made? We did cover this, but can we just circle back to that and make sure we touch on some best practices there?
I think you have to start over. And again, Jeff could discuss the legal aspects of this, but selecting the people to be impacted, the positions to be impacted, is really the focus. And so the organization needs to say, what's the driver here? What's the financial impact? How do we select the positions? How do we reconfigure? What are the business reasons for this? All of those continue to be the same legal impact that a layoff would have, that probably the organization went through as part of the furlough. I don't think that organizations are committed to lay off the same people who were furloughed. They might be, but I think that they've really got to start over in terms of examining what the needs are for the next steps in the business.
No, and I think Elaine hit the key point. It's whether or not the employer is committed to the RIF involving the employees who were previously selected for furlough, or whether they're changing course due to their business needs. And they need to go through the same kinds of processes that they did in the first place to make sure that you don't have any disparate impact or the like. Absolutely.
And one question I did see come through, I thought was a good one too, was if we do decide that we need to do layoffs, do you suggest that we do, somebody referred to as an initial quote unquote deep cut, or do we stagger it over periods of time? What are your thoughts on that?
That's such a great question. And Certainly, no organization wants to have layoffs every week. And so it's the hard work of HR making managers really do a very thorough review of what are the positions that we need to do this with. Let's make the deepest cuts that we can and still have the organization survive. Let's not get into an everyday occurrence or a multi-time occurrence, because your remaining employees want to know that they're secure. And if they stop feeling secure, if they have the opportunity to leave, then they will.
And I will briefly say in 2008, during the Great Recession,
Mm-hmm.
I saw a lot of clients do layoffs and waves, and it really did destroy employee morale.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a firm believer that it's something to be avoided. And people always have to remember, when employee morale is bad, that's what leads to litigation and those costs and burdens. So employee morale is more than just keeping people happy. It's in the financial interest of the company long term.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think to Elaine's point, it takes some real deep thinking to look at the organization and what do we want it to look like? What does it need to look like moving forward? What business areas are we going to de-emphasize? Which ones are we going to emphasize? What people might be impacted, and try and go as deep as you think you're going to need to go, because no one likes death by 1,000 cuts.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So I think this is a Jeff question, but I want to make sure we ask it. Now that we're in a more flexible working environment and potentially letting people work in different states, what is the best way to approach compliance in various states, and what are the most important things to consider aside from payroll and employee taxes?
Quite frankly, the payroll and employee taxes are the easiest issues. And when you have situations where you now have employees working remotely in different states, that means that quite possibly laws that did not previously apply to them now do. If you had an individual who resided in Illinois but worked in Indiana, then the Indiana employment laws were typically going to govern that relationship. But if the employee is now working remotely in Illinois, they're going to be potentially covered by the Illinois employment laws, which are usually more onerous than Indiana's. And so you really are going to be stuck, unfortunately, with looking at the laws that are in place in the various states and taking into account that where the person lives now may provide protections, whereas previously it did not.
Got it. Thank you. Very helpful. So we are going to be wrapping up. Believe it or not, we're almost at the hour. And I just want to reiterate, I want to be respectful of everybody's time and of calendars and so forth. As I mentioned at the beginning, we received, as you can imagine, a lot of questions even outside of what we asked today. So we are going to be providing you with a resource document in some capacity. So again, stay tuned for your email. As long as you registered, you'll receive that. It's going to cover a lot of the questions that you had answered. And I just want to thank everybody for your expertise and for being here today and providing your insights and perspective. And I know some of these things are so relative, right? They're relative to the certain situation. But anything that you want to, if you could just provide some pearl of wisdom, if you will, to an HR person right now in this environment, dealing with everything they have on their plate, anything in particular that you'd want from where you sit that you'd want them to know, to consider, to be thinking about, or anything like that?
One thing I would say is just remember, you don't have to go this alone. There's a lot of people that can be helpful to you that have expertise, not necessarily specifically in this environment, but certainly in the various areas of employment that you're going to be dealing with. And, all of us at Keystone, feel the need, like a lot of people do, to be giving back to our clients and being helpful in all possible ways. So if there are things that we can do to be helpful, please reach out to any one of the people that you have a relationship with. And I'm sure we have the resource to answer your questions and chip in and be as helpful as we possibly can.
Thank you, John. Yes, that's a good reminder. I forgot to mention that. whomever invited you to the event. If you do have specific questions or need information or want to ask additional questions, please just reply to the individual that invited you to the event, and we'll be sure to answer that. So Elaine, what would you like to leave? And then I'll have Jeff provide some insights too.
I think HR people are really going to be the keepers of the culture of an organization, and hopefully the leaders in improving a culture. Right now, they can provide the hope to people that they can come back to the workplace, and they'll be looking for your expertise, your commitment that they're safe, the work that you and your task forces are doing on bringing people back, and again, ensuring health and safety and wellness of these individuals. You're the people who are going to offer that trust. I think you're also the same people who are offering hope to the unemployed, that they will have work, that there will be work in your organization. And whether you hire one person or 100 people, this is a really important message to get out. And so we're controlling a lot of that news. And I think it's really important that we continue to push that message along to as many people a day as we touch.
Yeah, great, thank you. And Jeff, what about you? What would you like if you had the microphone to provide some insight to an HR leader and professional?
Yeah, no, I would really echo what John said. I think there's a lot of pressure on HR professionals right now to go it alone because of the extreme financial pressures on the companies. They're amazing, wonderful HR people who are, quite frankly, more knowledgeable about a lot of employment issues and even some young attorneys that I deal with from time to time. But everyone needs help every once in a while. And it doesn't have to be from a law firm. It can be from a consulting firm. It can be from others. And sometimes it's the avoiding the, penny wise, pound foolish scenario, where you're just stressed and being asked to do things on short notice. And sometimes those are the moments where it's best to reach out and ask for a little help.
Yeah, exactly. 2 heads are better than one, or 10 heads are better than one, right? It's very true. Very true. Well, I want to thank everybody. Thank you for letting me moderate today and elicit the wisdom from each of you. It's greatly appreciated. And I know our audience is just as appreciative. As I mentioned, and I'll mention it one more time, please stay tuned for more information from us regarding resources to any of the questions that we didn't get to. We are in the process of gathering those answers for you from experts outside of this realm that can really provide some good information for you. So thank you everybody for joining and your participation, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks, Brenda.
Thank you.
Take care.
Have a good evening.
Bye.